as we come back to you and we stay on this topic. Now we have another breaking news. In EU Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen says Europe, the United States and NATO have strengthened their common ground for Ukraine. Speaking after a virtual meeting with Presidents Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as European leaders, she described the discussions as a very good call and pledged that the EU will remain in close coordination with you on Ukraine. Now we have another breaking news. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has praised President Donald Trump's leadership and close coordination with allies following a virtual meeting on Ukraine. Rutte has said that NATO remains united in pushing to end what he called the terrible war against Ukraine. He described the discussions, which included President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders, as a great call ahead of President Trump's upcoming meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Now for this discussion, we go back to Ruben Johnson. He's a director at Asia Research Center at the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation. Thank you, Ruben, for staying with us. Now, you mentioned that you're not expecting much from the upcoming summit between President Putin and President Trump, but how do you interpret Ursula von der Leyen, also interpret the NATO leader Rutte's statements about strengthening the common ground between the EU, US, and NATO on Ukraine? Do you think this has changed US President Trump's mind anyhow in including Ukraine in upcoming talks?
Well, President Trump's mind was already changed before this happened, before the famous Oval Office meeting with General Secretary Rutte, because he had been, if you know the history on this, what had happened was right around the 4th of July weekend, this big holiday in America, which is our Independence Day. The Polish Foreign Secretary, Radoslaw Sikorski, had called General Keith Kellogg, who is a retired Lieutenant General who is Donald Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. He had called him and he said, hey, number one, the Russians have launched another huge attack on Kiev, and one of their drones has hit the Polish embassy. And number two, Putin is mocking your peace efforts. He thinks it's just a joke and he's using it to his advantage. And General Kellogg immediately called Trump and told Trump what was going on. And Trump said, that's it. You call Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon and you start sending all these weapons. And if Hegseth doesn't believe you, have him call me. So that was a watershed moment. And then we had a meeting in the Oval Office, just a number of days later with the NATO Secretary General, and Trump saying, hey, we have a great deal. The Europeans are going to buy these weapons, and then we are going to, and then they're going to take delivery of them, then they're going to give them to the Ukrainians, but it's going to be European money paying for them, not American taxpayer money.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Oh, you can complete your answer, Ruben.
So what I'm saying is that, of course, we know what Trump is like. He's mercurial, and we don't know. He could change his mind tomorrow about something, and I'm very worried about the fact that this is going to be a Putin-Trump one-on-one, and there will be no quote-unquote experts in the room. And Putin's extremely adept at spinning a lie and trying to make it sound like the truth and talking about all the victimization. Russians are always victims. They're never perpetrators. They've never done anything wrong. Only horrible, wrong things have been done to them. So I'm very, very cautious about all of that. But I guess the other thing we should remember is that Trump has already said that this entire event on the weekend, this is not a summit. This is not a decision-making event. He says this is a listening event. He's going to listen and probably render some sort of a final decision later. But I think all of us who are watching Ukraine and all of us who are fearful of what happens next are kind of waiting on pins and needles. I am.
Yeah. So, Ruben, you think that they won't even reach a ceasefire in this upcoming summit?
I'll tell you what's going to happen. Putin will offer a completely useless deal. He will offer, well, sort of partial ceasefires, like, okay, we won't hit power plants anymore, but we'll continue to hit military targets. And within military targets, that means cities, because every time a missile slams into an apartment building or a hospital, they claim they were shooting for something else. So that'll be the first thing. It'll be completely meaningless on that count, because it's not that the Ukrainians will take that anyone will take seriously, because the Russians, as I said, they don't want the conflict to end. And I guess the only other thing I would say is that any kind of a ceasefire would have to be something that would be enforceable and would have to be monitored. Who's going to monitor it? The OSCE, this organization that the Russians have completely hollowed out, that's who you're going to have do that? Who's going to do it? The UN? The UN, who's been useless on Ukraine ever since the beginning. So who's going to monitor this? Who's going to say, who's going to be the authority who decides who's broken the ceasefire? And then what's the punishment if someone breaks a ceasefire? What are the sanctions for that? So again, I'm very, very skeptical. And of course, where all of this will go is that if Zelensky doesn't agree to Putin's unreasonable demands, then the narrative will be that, oh, well, Vladimir Zelensky, he's the obstacle to peace. We're only still fighting because of him. He's the only reason. That'll be the Russian narrative. And I'm sure other people will pick it up as well.
And Ruben, do you think that this statement by European Union, all of them together, the leaders that are coming in and issuing these statements, it means nothing to Putin?
I think it means very little to Putin. Putin doesn't care about the EU. Putin thinks the EU is a paper tiger. I mean, look at the size of some of their militaries. Look what they say. They say, well, oh, we're all spending 5% on military. Well, really? Is it really 5%? It really isn't, because they're repackaging things that they were already doing, like improving rail lines. So that was already in somebody else's budget. So if you take money out of somebody else's budget that's already allocated and you move it over here and you say it's defense spending, that's not really more defense spending.
Right. Thank you very much, Ruben Johnson, for joining us today and sharing your insight all the way from Warsaw. Now we move on to our next news. At least 20 people have passed away after a migrant boat capsized off the southern Italian island of Lampedusa, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency and local media. Rescue teams have recovered the bodies, while between 70 and 80 survivors have been pulled from the water. Officials fear more may still be missing. UNHCR's Filippo Ungaro voiced deep anguish, saying another 20 people remain unaccounted for. The Italian Interior Ministry has yet to comment on the tragedy, which comes amid rising migrant crossings in the Mediterranean. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.